The night feels calm, but it is the kind of calm that arrives just before something shifts forever. Across Europe, candles burn late in palaces and offices, and no one is quite sure why sleep feels unnecessary. A crown has been placed, a title has changed, and suddenly the future seems louder than usual, somewhere between confidence and unease. An entire continent senses that a long season of war is quietly waking up. In December 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte becomes Emperor of the French, completing a rise so rapid that it leaves Europe unsettled. In little more than 10 years, he has moved from relative obscurity to absolute authority, carried upward by revolution, military success, and an instinct for power. For many European rulers, this is not just a change of leadership in France, but a warning that old rules no longer guarantee safety. France is no longer merely influential, it is dominant, energetic, and unapologetically ambitious. War has shaped Napoleon's path, and war will shape his reign. The French state is reorganized around constant readiness, and the army becomes the central instrument of policy. This is not presented as chaos, but as order of a new kind, efficient, disciplined, and mobile. Napoleon does not threaten Europe with words alone. He does so with numbers, with movement, and with the visible ability to act faster than anyone expects. Across the Channel, Britain watches carefully. The British government understands that as long as its navy controls the seas, the island remains secure from invasion. Yet it also understands its limits. Britain cannot easily confront Napoleon on land, and France cannot challenge Britain at sea. The rivalry settles into an uneasy balance, each side strong where the other is weak, neither able to deliver a final blow. Britain chooses a familiar path, one refined over generations, using diplomacy, subsidies, and alliances to turn continental powers against France. British leaders fear that Napoleon's expanding influence will destroy Europe's balance of power. A single dominant state, they believe, would make lasting peace impossible. So Britain begins encouraging cooperation among those who feel most threatened by French success. Austria sees its influence shrinking with every French victory, particularly in Germany and Italy. Russia views Napoleon as an unpredictable force who could reshape Eastern Europe next. Other states, anxious and watchful, begin to align themselves along similar lines. Gradually, these concerns take formal shape. Britain, Austria, Russia, Sweden, and Naples form what becomes known as the Third Coalition. Their shared goal is to contain French power and, if possible, defeat it outright. Plans are drawn for a coordinated campaign with multiple armies advancing in support of one another. On paper, the strategy looks impressive, combining manpower, geography, and timing. In practice, it depends on communication, trust, and speed, three things that coalitions often struggle to maintain. Napoleon learns of these plans and responds in a way that has already become his trademark. He decides not to wait. Rather than allowing enemy armies time to unite, he chooses to strike first. While their coordination is still fragile, orders are issued, and the French army begins to move with purpose and urgency. His forces are no longer just defending France, they are preparing to carry the fight directly to the heart of the coalition. Along the Channel coast, a massive French army stands assembled, a reminder of France's strength and a message to Britain. Yet the real movement is inland, toward the great rivers and roads of Central Europe. The coming conflict will not be decided by speeches or ceremonies, but by marching speed, timing, and the ability to surprise. As Europe drifts toward open war once again, the pieces are in motion and the first decisive steps are already being taken. The Third Coalition and the decision to strike first. As the new empire settles into place, Europe does not relax, it stiffens. The coronation is over, the titles have been adjusted, but the real work now happens quietly in correspondence, councils, and guarded conversations. Britain continues what it does best, watching the continent from behind a shield of water, measuring every movement in Paris and every rumor drifting across the Channel. The question is no longer whether Napoleon intends to shape Europe, but how quickly he can be stopped and who is willing to stand in front of him long enough to try. Britain knows it cannot face France alone on land, and it has no intention of trying. Instead, it reaches for its most reliable tools, patience, money, and alliances. Gold travels faster than armies, and British subsidies begin flowing toward continental powers willing to resist French expansion. Diplomats work steadily, reassuring old rivals that this is not Britain's war alone, but a shared effort to restore balance. The tone is calm, almost reasonable, but beneath it lies urgency. Napoleon's strength is growing, and delay only favors him. Austria responds first and most eagerly. French victories over the past years have steadily reduced Austrian influence, especially in Germany and Italy. Each adjustment of borders feels like a loss of status, and each French reform threatens to make that loss permanent. Vienna does not see Napoleon as a temporary problem, but as a force that could erase Austria's traditional role in Europe. Russia follows, more cautiously, but with equal concern. From St. Petersburg, Napoleon appears as a distant yet unsettling figure, capable of pulling events westward and eastward at the same time. Gradually, the Third Coalition takes shape. Britain, Austria, and Russia form its core, joined by Sweden and Naples. On paper, the alliance looks formidable. Combined, these powers can field enormous armies, control vast territories, and apply pressure from multiple directions. The plan is ambitious and optimistic, relying on coordinated offensives that will overwhelm France before it can respond effectively. There is confidence in numbers and comfort in shared purpose. It is the kind of confidence that looks solid until the first march begins. The coalition's strategy centers on timing. Austrian and Russian forces are expected to converge, creating a powerful main army that will advance into French-controlled territory. Other Allied forces will support these movements, stretching French defenses and forcing Napoleon to react rather than act. If everything works as planned, France will be pushed back, its resources strained, and its emperor forced into a defensive posture. It is an orderly plan, well-reasoned, and deeply dependent on everyone doing exactly what they promised, exactly when they promised. Napoleon has little interest in waiting to see how well others keep their schedules. Intelligence reaches him quickly, and he understands the danger of allowing Allied armies time to assemble. He has built his success on speed, flexibility, and initiative, and this moment calls for all three. Instead of continuing to focus on Britain, he decides to change direction entirely. The great army assembled along the Channel coast remains in place, impressive and threatening, but it becomes a distraction rather than a destination. The confrontation with Britain at sea is postponed, not abandoned, but set aside. Napoleon accepts a simple reality. As long as the Royal Navy dominates the oceans, an invasion of Britain will remain uncertain and costly. He chooses not to force the issue. Instead, he turns toward the continent, where roads, rivers, and borders can be crossed by men who march fast enough. It is a practical decision, and a very Napoleonic one, favoring what can be controlled over what cannot. Orders ripple through the French army. Units that had been waiting near the coast begin preparing for rapid movement eastward. The army is reorganized, supplied, and redirected with remarkable efficiency. What looks from the outside like a sudden change of plan is in fact a smooth transition, made possible by constant preparation. Napoleon does not see war as a sequence of isolated events, but as a continuous process, one that allows for quick turns when opportunity appears. His objective is clear and sharply defined. He does not intend to fight the entire coalition at once. That would be wasteful and uncertain. Instead, he aims to isolate a single enemy force, defeat it decisively, and alter the balance before the rest of the Allies can react. Austria, positioned forward and eager to act, becomes the natural target. An Austrian army has advanced prematurely, moving ahead of its partners and stretching its lines. To Napoleon, this is not a threat, but an invitation. The plan is simple in concept and demanding in execution. French forces will move rapidly, using multiple routes to conceal their true direction. Feints and demonstrations will distract the enemy, while the main body advances with speed toward its chosen target. By the time the Austrians realize what is happening, Napoleon intends for French troops to be behind them, beside them, and closing in front of them all at once. It is a plan that relies on movement more than brute force, and on confusion more than confrontation. The strength of the French army lies not only in numbers, but in organization. Napoleon's forces are arranged in self-contained units capable of marching and fighting independently for short periods. This allows the army to spread out across wide areas, living off the land and moving quickly without long supply trains. Roads that would choke a single mass of troops can easily support several smaller columns. To the enemy, French movements appear scattered and unclear until suddenly they are not. As the French army begins its march, coalition commanders struggle to interpret what they see. Reports arrive late, contradictory, and often incomplete. Some suggest Napoleon is still focused on Britain, others warn of movements toward the Rhine. Decisions are delayed as leaders wait for confirmation, and waiting costs time. Meanwhile, French columns continue advancing, their pace steady and relentless. Napoleon understands that uncertainty is his ally, and he uses it generously. Austria's forward army finds itself increasingly exposed. It has advanced with confidence, expecting support from Russian forces that are still far away. Communication is slow and distances are longer than anticipated. What seemed like a bold move now looks risky, but by the time this becomes clear, options are limited. Retreat would concede initiative, and standing still invites encirclement. The Austrian command hesitates, hoping for clarity that never quite arrives. Napoleon does not hesitate. He presses forward, narrowing the gap and tightening the situation. His intention is not merely to win a battle, but to remove an entire army from the war in one stroke. A decisive victory here would do more than weaken the coalition militarily. It would shake confidence, disrupt plans, and force every Allied leader to reconsider assumptions. In war, psychology travels faster than cavalry, and Napoleon intends to send a powerful message. As autumn approaches, Europe drifts toward its next great confrontation. The Third Coalition exists, its armies mobilized, and its intentions declared. But before it can fully act, Napoleon has already made his move. While diplomats argue and generals wait for perfect alignment, the French emperor is already marching, already choosing where the war will truly begin. The contest is no longer theoretical. It is underway step by step, road by road, and the first blow is about to land. Ulm and the quiet power of the core system. The march eastward continues without drama, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. There are no grand announcements, no sudden clashes of armies, only columns of French soldiers moving steadily along different roads, passing through villages that barely have time to notice them. To an observer, it might look unfocused, even careless, as if the army has scattered itself across the countryside. In reality, this apparent looseness is the heart of Napoleon's design, and it is about to close like a net. At the center of this design is a new way of organizing armies, one that quietly reshapes how war is fought. Napoleon's forces are divided into large, self-contained formations known as corps. Each corps is commanded by a marshal and includes its own infantry, cavalry, artillery, engineers, and support units. In practical terms, this means each corps can march, fight, and survive on its own for a limited time. It does not need to wait for the entire army to move together, and it does not collapse if separated from the rest. This structure gives the French army an extraordinary flexibility. Instead of moving as one massive block, slow and vulnerable, Napoleon's army advances in several parallel columns. These columns can take different routes, use different sources of supply, and avoid crowding roads. Soldiers live off the land, requisitioning food locally rather than relying on long supply trains. Movement becomes faster, lighter, and far harder for enemies to track. To opposing commanders, French positions seem unclear, their intentions uncertain, their numbers impossible to pin down. Yet dispersion does not mean weakness. The brilliance of the core system lies in its ability to reverse dispersion quickly. When the enemy is located, the scattered corps can converge rapidly, assembling a powerful force at exactly the right place. Roads that carried one column yesterday now carry several, and within days, sometimes hours, an overwhelming concentration appears where none seemed possible. It is this ability to appear suddenly and in strength that defines Napoleon's operational style. In the autumn of 1805, this system is about to face its first great test. The Austrian army under General Karl Mack has advanced into Bavaria, a French ally, expecting support from Russian forces that are still far away. Mack believes he is acting decisively, pushing forward, before the French can organize a response. What he does not realize is that Napoleon's response is already underway, and it is faster than anything he has planned for. Napoleon identifies Mack's army as the perfect target. It is forward, isolated, and dependent on coordination that has not yet materialized. Instead of confronting it head-on, Napoleon decides to surround it. He orders Marshal Murat to conduct demonstrations and feint attacks through the Black Forest, drawing Austrian attention southward. Murat, flamboyant and energetic, performs this role enthusiastically, keeping Mack focused on the wrong direction. Meanwhile, the main body of the French army moves north of the Austrian position, crossing the Rhine and advancing rapidly along multiple routes. Corps under marshals such as Ney, Soult, Lannes, and Davout march hard, their movements concealed by distance, speed, and uncertainty. Austrian scouts report French activity, but the reports are confusing and often dismissed. Mack struggles to understand how an enemy he expects in one place keeps appearing somewhere else entirely. As days pass, the situation tightens. French corps begin crossing the Danube behind Mack, cutting off his lines of communication and retreat. What had seemed like a bold Austrian advance now becomes a trap. Mack attempts to respond, ordering counterattacks and redeployments, but coordination is poor and information incomplete. Each move comes a little too late, aimed at a problem that has already shifted. The French, by contrast, move with confidence and clarity. Corps commanders know their roles and trust the overall plan. They do not need constant direction because the structure itself provides guidance. When resistance appears, they engage just long enough to hold it. When opportunity arises, they press forward. The army behaves less like a single organism and more like a system, flexible, adaptive, and quietly relentless. Mack launches a series of attempts to break out of the tightening encirclement. Some Austrian units fight bravely, and there are sharp clashes as columns try to force passages through French lines. But these efforts lack coordination and arrive piecemeal. French units shift to meet them, sometimes yielding ground deliberately, sometimes striking suddenly. Each Austrian success proves temporary, and each failure reduces options further. All the while, Mack places his hope in the approaching Russian army under General Kutuzov. If the Russians arrive in time, the situation might still be salvaged, but distance and fatigue slow their march. They are days away, then weeks, and every day that passes favors Napoleon. The French emperor understands this perfectly and maintains pressure without rushing. There is no need for a dramatic battle if patience will achieve the same result. By mid-October, the Austrian army is effectively sealed inside the area around the town of Ulm. French forces hold the crossings, the roads, and the surrounding high ground. Supplies grow scarce, morale sinks, and confusion spreads through the Austrian ranks. Messages sent out fail to return, orders issued fail to take effect. The realization sets in slowly, then all at once, that there is no clear way out. On October 19th, just 6 weeks after the war has begun, General Mack accepts the inevitable. At Ulm, he surrenders his entire army to Napoleon. Nearly 60,000 Austrian soldiers lay down their arms, along with their artillery, standards, and equipment. It is one of the most decisive non-battlefield victories in military history, achieved through movement, organization, and timing, rather than a single climactic fight. The scale of the success is staggering. An entire enemy army has been removed from the war at minimal cost to the French. The road into Central Europe now lies open, and the coalition's plans are in disarray. Austria has lost its forward force before its allies can even engage. Confidence among the coalition falters, while French morale rises steadily. Soldiers sense they are part of something unusually effective, even if they cannot quite explain why everything seems to work. Napoleon understands the broader impact immediately. Ulm is not just a victory, it is a demonstration. It shows what his army can do, how quickly it can move, and how decisively it can strike. It validates the core system and confirms his belief that speed and structure can overcome numbers and tradition. Other European powers take note, even if they do not yet know how to respond. For the French army, there is little time to celebrate. Orders are already being issued for the next phase of operations. Russian forces are retreating, seeking to avoid the same fate as the Austrians. Vienna lies ahead, and with it new challenges and opportunities. The war has only just begun, but its character has already been defined. As the soldiers march on from Ulm, there is a quiet confidence in their steps. They have not fought a great battle, yet they have won something greater: time, momentum, and belief. And somewhere in Europe, generals study their maps again, wondering how an army that seemed scattered and distant yesterday can suddenly appear everywhere at once today. The road to Vienna and the measured retreat of Kutuzov. The fall of Ulm does not bring silence, only motion. Armies rarely pause after such a shock, and this one moves even faster. News of the Austrian surrender spreads quickly across Europe, carried by messengers who ride hard and speak softly because the implications are heavy. An entire army has vanished from the field, and the war has changed shape. For Napoleon, Ulm opens the door eastward. For his enemies, it is a warning that hesitation now carries a price. The Russian commander, General Mikhail Kutuzov, understands this immediately. Unlike Mack, he has no desire to test Napoleon in an unfavorable position. His army has marched an enormous distance from Russia, covering hundreds of miles under exhausting conditions. The men are tired, supplies are thin, and winter is approaching. Kutuzov is experienced enough to know that bravery cannot replace logistics, and that a poorly chosen battle can destroy an army faster than any retreat. When word reaches him of Ulm, Kutuzov makes a clear decision. He orders his forces to withdraw, abandoning any thought of standing alongside the shattered Austrian army. The retreat is deliberate and organized, not a flight, but a controlled movement designed to preserve strength. Rear guards are assigned, routes are selected carefully, and the army pulls back step by step, trading space for time. It is not glorious, but it is wise. Napoleon pursues, though not recklessly. He understands the difference between pressure and haste. French columns advance, pressing the Russian rear, forcing skirmishes and sharp engagements meant to keep the enemy unsettled. These actions are brief and intense, designed to delay, disrupt, and gather information rather than to force a decisive clash. Kutuzov's troops fight these rear-guard actions with discipline, slowing the French just enough to maintain distance without being drawn into a larger battle. The landscape plays its role. Rivers, roads, and towns become temporary barriers and fleeting objectives. Each crossing is contested, each delay carefully calculated. The Russians withdraw through familiar territory, while the French move farther from their bases. Supplies become more complex, communication lines longer. Napoleon knows that time, which has favored him so far, will eventually begin to work against him if the war drags on. Despite the Russian retreat, Austria's capital cannot be saved. Vienna lies exposed, and its defenses are inadequate against a confident and advancing French army. On November 12th, French forces enter the city. There is no dramatic siege, no prolonged resistance. The occupation is swift, almost matter-of-fact, as if the city itself understands that the decision has already been made elsewhere. capture of Vienna is a significant political and symbolic moment. One of Europe's great capitals now lies in French hands, a visible sign of Napoleon's reach. Yet the strategic situation is more complicated than it appears. The main enemy army has not been defeated. Kutuzov has slipped away, preserving his forces and avoiding the fate that befell Mack. Vienna is a prize, but it is not a conclusion. Kutuzov continues his withdrawal toward the town of Olmütz in what is now the Czech lands. There he hopes to regroup, receive reinforcements, and choose ground more favorable for a major engagement. As he retreats, he is joined by additional Russian units and soon by the presence of high authority. The Russian Emperor Alexander arrives, along with the Austrian Emperor Francis. Their arrival changes the atmosphere of the campaign. Decisions now carry political weight as well as military consequence. Napoleon is frustrated by Kutuzov's escape. He would have preferred to force a decisive battle earlier while the coalition was still disorganized. Instead, he finds himself deep in enemy territory with winter approaching and supply lines stretched. His army, though victorious and confident, is beginning to feel the strain of continuous movement and extended operations. Horses are tired, boots are worn, and food must be gathered from regions that are less cooperative by the day. The strategic balance begins to shift subtly. The longer the war continues, the more opportunities the coalition has to concentrate its forces. Reinforcements can arrive, plans can be adjusted, and mistakes can be corrected. Napoleon understands that his advantage lies in momentum, and momentum cannot be stored indefinitely. He needs a decisive battle, one that will break the coalition's will and force a settlement before conditions deteriorate. Ironically, help arrives in the form of overconfidence. The young Russian Emperor Alexander is eager for glory and inclined to assert his authority. He is less cautious than Kutuzov, more willing to believe that the French can be beaten in open battle. Advisors and courtiers reinforce this belief, convinced that Napoleon's army, far from home and surrounded by enemies, must be vulnerable. Kutuzov's reservations are noted, then set aside. Napoleon senses this shift. He carefully chooses a battlefield near the town of Austerlitz, a rolling landscape of villages, streams, and gentle heights. It is ground that allows for maneuver, deception, and sudden concentration, all tools he knows well. He positions his army deliberately, creating the appearance of weakness where he intends to invite attack. His dispositions are not defensive in spirit, but provocative, designed to shape the enemy's decisions. On the night before the battle, Napoleon personally oversees the final arrangements. Campfires glow in the darkness and soldiers settle into uneasy rest. The army is tired but experienced, aware that something significant is approaching. For Napoleon, the timing is symbolic. The coming day marks the anniversary of his coronation, though he says little about it. He knows that symbolism means nothing without success. As dawn approaches, the situation is finely balanced. Two great armies face one another, roughly equal in size, each convinced in its own way that victory is possible. The coalition holds high ground and believes it has identified a vulnerable French flank. Napoleon waits, calm and attentive, trusting that the enemy will do exactly what he hopes. What follows will determine more than the fate of Vienna or even Austria. It will decide whether Napoleon can end the campaign on his terms or whether the war will stretch onward into uncertainty and exhaustion. For now, the pursuit is over. The retreat has reached its chosen ground, and the quiet tension before battle settles across the fields. Europe holds its breath once more as the search for a decisive moment finally comes to an end. Austerlitz, the center breaks, and the shape of victory. Morning arrives gently on the fields near Austerlitz, with pale light and a low mist resting over the ground like a blanket that has not yet decided to leave. It is the second day of December 1805, and the air is cold, clear, and quiet in a way that feels almost respectful. Two armies face each other across rolling land and shallow streams, each convinced that the coming hours will decide more than a single battle. For Napoleon, it is a moment he has been preparing for since Ulm. For the coalition, it is the chance to stop him before his momentum becomes permanent. The Allied army of Russians and Austrians deploys with confidence. They hold the Pratzen Heights, a broad rise of ground that dominates the center of the battlefield. From this elevated position, their commanders believe they can control the fight, directing attacks and observing French movements below. Their plan is straightforward and, in their view, logical. They intend to strike Napoleon's right flank, which appears weak and stretched thin, then roll inward, cutting off the French line and forcing a retreat. It is an aggressive design, fueled by the belief that Napoleon has overextended himself. Napoleon encourages this belief. His right wing is deliberately light, held by troops ordered to resist but not to dominate. He wants it to look vulnerable, inviting the enemy to commit forces there. His army is arranged with care, each corps positioned not simply to hold ground, but to move at the right moment. The French line bends slightly, not enough to collapse, but enough to suggest strain. It is a performance, and the audience is watching closely. As the sun rises higher, the mist lingers, obscuring details and muffling movement. Orders are issued on both sides, though not always with the same clarity. The coalition's plan requires precise timing, coordination between columns, and firm control over troops moving down from the Pratzen Heights. In theory, it is achievable. In practice, fog, distance, and hesitation begin to interfere. Units wait for instructions that arrive late, and columns move off at different speeds. The battle opens with fighting on the French right as coalition troops descend from the heights and engage French units near villages and streams. The French resist stubbornly, giving ground slowly and carefully, exactly as planned. Each step back draws the Allies farther from their strong position. To the coalition commanders, this appears to confirm their expectations. They believe the French line is weakening, and they press harder, committing more troops to the attack. While attention focuses on the right, Napoleon watches the center. The Pratzen Heights, once crowded with Allied troops, are now thinning as units move off to the south. This is the moment he has been waiting for. He turns to Marshal Soult and gives the order that will define the battle. French divisions, hidden moments before by mist, begin advancing directly toward the heights. The movement is sudden, unexpected, and decisive. As the fog lifts, Allied commanders see French troops emerging where they had not expected them, climbing toward the very ground they had just abandoned. Kutuzov scrambles to organize a defense, pulling units back to meet the threat. The fighting on the heights becomes intense and close. Musket fire crackles rapidly, and formations clash at short range. Training and discipline matter here, and the French, drilled and experienced, press their advantage steadily. After hours of hard fighting, The French secure the Pratzen Heights. This achievement splits the Allied army in two, severing communication and coordination between its wings. What had been a single, confident force now becomes two separate problems, each struggling to understand what the other is doing. Napoleon's central thrust has done exactly what it was designed to do, not merely take ground, but fracture the enemy's structure. To the north, another drama unfolds. Large cavalry formations from both sides engage in sweeping charges across open ground. Sabers flash, horses surge and wheel, and the clash becomes a test of nerve as much as strength. The fighting is chaotic but crucial. Control of this sector determines whether either side can maneuver freely. French heavy cavalry eventually gains the upper hand, stabilizing the flank and allowing infantry to advance. The coalition makes one final effort to recover the situation. The Russian Imperial Guard, elite troops held in reserve, is thrown into the fight in an attempt to retake the heights. For a moment, the outcome seems uncertain. French units are driven back in places, and the struggle tightens. Napoleon responds by committing his own guard cavalry, and the elite forces of both armies collide in fierce, concentrated fighting. It is a brutal contest. But the French prevail, pushing the Russian Guard back and sealing control of the center. Meanwhile, the Allied left wing, still heavily engaged around villages and low ground, begins to realize its danger. French forces now swing southward, threatening to cut off retreat routes. Under mounting pressure, Allied units attempt to withdraw, but confusion spreads quickly. The terrain offers limited escape, and in places, retreat turns into disorder. Artillery fire adds to the chaos, and cohesion breaks down. By afternoon, the outcome is clear. The Allied army is in full retreat, leaving behind prisoners, guns, and standards. The French have not merely won a battle, they have dismantled the coalition's main force. Casualties are heavy on both sides, and the battlefield is littered with the remnants of a long, exhausting day. For Napoleon, the victory is complete, achieved through planning, timing, and execution rather than sheer force. The political consequences follow swiftly. Austria, having suffered another devastating defeat, has little choice but to seek peace. Negotiations lead to a settlement that costs Austria territory, influence, and money. The Third Coalition collapses, its hopes shattered on the slopes of the Pratzen Heights. Russia withdraws its forces, reassessing its position and its strategy. Austerlitz becomes known as one of Napoleon's greatest victories, a battle that confirms his reputation as a master of operational and tactical warfare. It demonstrates the effectiveness of deception, concentration, and decisive action. For Europe, it marks a turning point. The balance of power shifts again, and Napoleon stands at the height of his influence. As night falls over the battlefield, fires flicker among exhausted troops. There is no triumphal celebration, only the quiet knowledge that something important has been settled, at least for now. The war will continue in new forms and new places, but Austerlitz leaves an imprint that cannot be ignored. It is a reminder that battles are not always won by numbers alone, but by understanding where and when to strike. After Austerlitz, a new order, and Prussia steps forward. After Austerlitz, the sound of battle fades, but the consequences echo everywhere. Armies pull back, wounded men are gathered, and reports travel across Europe faster than any marching column. The victory has not merely defeated an enemy force, it has rearranged expectations. For many rulers, The question is no longer whether Napoleon can dominate the continent, but how long he intends to do so, and what shape that domination will take. Peace returns briefly, but it is the uneasy kind, resting on calculations rather than trust. Napoleon moves quickly to consolidate what he has gained. Victory, in his view, is only useful if it is organized. Across Italy and the German lands, French influence is strengthened and formalized. Borders are adjusted, titles reassigned, and alliances reshaped. Friendly states are rewarded, hesitant ones are pressured, and former enemies are reminded of their vulnerability. The goal is not chaos, but structure, a Europe aligned with French interests and stabilized under French supervision. In Italy, Napoleon tightens his control, ensuring that local governments follow Paris rather than their own instincts. In the German territories, a new political arrangement emerges. Smaller states are grouped together into a loose federation under French protection, reducing the influence of older imperial structures and simplifying the political map. For Napoleon, this is efficiency. Applied to diplomacy, fewer actors, clearer loyalties, and less room for resistance. These changes unsettle Europe deeply, especially in Berlin. Prussia has remained on the sidelines during the campaign against the Third Coalition, watching events unfold with growing discomfort. For decades, Prussia's military reputation has rested on victories from an earlier age. Its army is respected, its discipline admired, and its identity tied closely to military pride. Yet as Napoleon reshapes Central Europe, Prussia finds itself increasingly marginal, its influence shrinking without a battle being fought. At first, Prussian leaders hesitate. They remember the cost of war and the speed with which Napoleon has crushed his opponents. But hesitation slowly gives way to frustration. French troops have moved through German lands with ease, allies of Prussia have been elevated without Prussian input, and territory once considered within Prussia's sphere of influence now answers to Paris. Each diplomatic slight feels sharper than the last. The issue of Hanover becomes the final spark. This German territory, long associated with the British crown, has passed through French hands and been used as a bargaining chip in negotiations. When Prussia realizes that Napoleon has been willing to trade Hanover's fate without fully committing to Prussian interests, outrage follows. To Prussian leaders, this feels like a personal insult, as well as a strategic threat. Trust erodes rapidly. Within the Prussian court, opinion hardens. Advisors argue that delay only benefits France and that Prussia's reputation will not survive continued passivity. There is also a sense that Napoleon's army, stretched across Europe and engaged in constant campaigning, must eventually be vulnerable. Confidence in Prussia's own military traditions reinforces this belief. The army, after all, is still admired across Europe, and its officers are certain that discipline and courage can compensate for any disadvantages. Yet beneath this confidence lies a problem. Prussia's army has not modernized at the same pace as Napoleon's. Command structures are rigid, decision-making is slow, and coordination between units relies heavily on tradition rather than adaptability. The lessons of recent wars have not been fully absorbed. While Napoleon's forces have evolved, Prussia's remain anchored to past successes, proud, capable, but increasingly out of step with modern warfare. Despite these weaknesses, Prussia chooses confrontation. Diplomatic channels narrow and military preparations accelerate. The hope is that a firm stance will rally allies and force Napoleon into retreat or negotiation. An ultimatum is drafted and sent, demanding French withdrawal from disputed territories. It is a bold move, but also a risky one because it is issued before Prussia's alliances are fully secured. This is the critical miscalculation. Prussia assumes that other powers, particularly Russia, will move in concert. In reality, distances are great, communication is slow, and coordination remains uncertain. Russian forces are not yet in position to provide immediate support, and other potential allies hesitate, wary of committing too soon. Prussia stands forward, confident, but increasingly alone. Napoleon reads the situation clearly. He understands that Prussia has stepped out of alignment, acting before its partners are ready. To him, this is familiar territory. A single enemy, isolated by timing and geography, presents an opportunity similar to the one Austria offered before Ulm. Napoleon does not rush, but he does not retreat either. He begins preparing his army with quiet efficiency, shifting forces and issuing orders that suggest a rapid response. The contrast between the two sides grows sharper. Prussia mobilizes according to established routines, gathering forces methodically and relying on centralized control. Napoleon's army, by contrast, prepares to move as it always does, inflexible corps, capable of rapid concentration. Where Prussia sees strength in order and tradition, Napoleon sees opportunity in speed and initiative. Public opinion in Prussia adds pressure. Pride and fear combine, creating an atmosphere in which compromise feels impossible. To back down now would mean accepting diminished status in a Europe increasingly shaped by French decisions. Leaders convince themselves that action, even risky action, is preferable to slow irrelevance. War becomes not just a strategic choice, but a matter of national identity. As autumn approaches once again, Europe shifts into another phase of conflict. The peace after Austerlitz has been brief, and its promises already fading. Prussia has made its move, issuing its challenge and setting events in motion. Napoleon, having reorganized much of the continent, turns his attention northward. For the moment, there is still silence on the battlefields. Armies assemble, orders are written, and maps are studied late into the night. The shape of Europe has changed, but it is not yet settled. One power has risen, another feels cornered, and a new war waits just beyond the horizon, calm, patient, and inevitable. Jena and Auerstädt. One day, two battles, and a sudden collapse. The morning of October 14th, 1806, arrives wrapped in thick fog, the kind that softens sound and blurs distance, making every movement feel slower than it really is. Across the rolling hills and narrow roads of central Germany, two armies are searching for each other, each convinced it understands where the other stands. It is one of those days when history quietly sets a trap, then waits patiently for everyone to walk into it. Napoleon believes he has finally found the main Prussian army near the town of Jena. Reports from his forward commanders suggest a sizable force ahead, and that is enough. He orders his corps to concentrate, confident that a decisive engagement is at hand. The plan is familiar and comfortable. Fix the enemy in place, bring up overwhelming force, and break the line through coordinated pressure. Everything seems to be unfolding according to expectation, which is usually the moment when something unexpected happens. What Napoleon does not yet know is that the Prussian army is divided. A substantial force under Prince Hohenlohe is indeed near Jena, but it is not the main body. The true Prussian field army, larger and more dangerous, is moving farther north, marching directly into the path of Marshal Davout's Third Corps, near the village of Auerstädt. Davout, disciplined and methodical, has no reason to believe he is about to meet the full weight of Prussia alone. As dawn breaks slowly through the fog, the Battle of Jena begins. Napoleon's troops already hold a foothold on the plateau overlooking the town, and their immediate task is to push the Prussians back to make room for arriving reinforcements. French infantry advances steadily, supported by artillery that moves forward with practiced efficiency. Villages change hands, musket fire echoes in the mist, and the battlefield gradually reveals itself. Prussian forces fight with determination, but their movements are cautious and often delayed. Orders take time to circulate, and units hesitate as they wait for confirmation. Napoleon, present on the field, adjusts deployments as fresh corps arrive. What begins as a contested engagement slowly turns into mounting pressure. French infantry, cavalry, and artillery work together seamlessly, each arm supporting the others, creating a constant, exhausting strain on the Prussian line. By late morning, the imbalance becomes clear. Napoleon's army has grown from an initial force into a massive concentration, while the Prussians remain fixed, reacting rather than acting. When the French launch a general advance, the Prussian line begins to buckle. At first it retreats in order, then in fragments, and finally in confusion. Cavalry pours through gaps, artillery advances to closer range, and resistance collapses into flight. The Battle of Jena ends in a decisive French victory. Prussian formations dissolve, leaving behind guns, standards, and prisoners. It is a crushing blow, but it is only half the story of the day. While Napoleon secures triumph to the south, a very different struggle has been unfolding to the north, one that will prove equally decisive and perhaps even more remarkable. At Auerstädt, Marshal Davout faces a starkly different reality. His Third Corps numbers around 27,000 men. Opposing him is the main Prussian army, over 50,000 strong, supported by substantial artillery. The terrain offers little room to maneuver, and retreat would expose the corps to destruction. Davout understands immediately that he must stand and fight, not for glory, but for survival. The engagement begins with Prussian cavalry probing Davout's positions, charging repeatedly in an effort to break French infantry formations. Davout's troops form squares with calm precision, repelling attack after attack with disciplined volleys. The fighting is fierce and close, and casualties mount quickly. Yet the French line holds, anchored around the village of Hassenhausen. As more Prussian units arrive, Davout commits his divisions carefully, refusing to panic or overextend. Artillery is positioned to cover approaches, infantry supports one another, and every movement is deliberate. The Prussians, confident in their numbers, attempt frontal assaults rather than maneuvering for advantage. Their attacks are brave but poorly coordinated, arriving in waves rather than as a unified force. A critical moment comes when the Prussian commander, the Duke of Brunswick, is mortally wounded. Command falters and uncertainty spreads through the Prussian ranks. King Frederick William himself attempts to direct operations, but hesitation replaces momentum. Several Prussian units remain uncommitted, waiting for orders that arrive too late or not at all. Sensing the shift, Davout seizes the moment. He orders a counterattack, pushing his weary but determined troops forward. The effect is startling. Prussian units, already shaken by failed assaults and leadership confusion, begin to give ground. What should have been a controlled withdrawal turns into a general retreat. Davout's corps, against all expectations, drives the main Prussian army from the field. By early afternoon, the outcome at Auerstädt is decided. The Prussian army withdraws in disorder, leaving Davout in possession of the battlefield. His corps has suffered heavy losses, but it has achieved something extraordinary. Outnumbered, unsupported, and unaware of the larger picture, Davout has defeated the core of Prussia's military power through discipline, positioning, and sheer determination. When news of Auerstädt reaches Napoleon, he is initially incredulous. The idea that Davout has engaged and defeated the main Prussian army seems almost impossible. When confirmation arrives, admiration follows. Davout is praised openly, his reputation secured as one of the finest commanders in the French army. The contrast with other commanders who failed to appear where ordered is noted quietly, then remembered. Together, Jena and Auerstädt shatter Prussia's military system in a single day. Two battles fought separately combine into a single catastrophe. The Prussian army loses not just men and material, but coherence. Command structures break down, confidence evaporates, and the ability to resist in an organized way disappears almost overnight. In the days that follow, French forces pursue relentlessly. Without time to regroup, Prussian units surrender in large numbers. Cities open their gates, fortresses capitulate, and the road to Berlin lies open. The myth of Prussian invincibility, built over decades, dissolves in weeks. For Napoleon, the campaign confirms once again the value of speed, initiative, and flexible command. For Prussia, it is a harsh lesson in the cost of relying on past glory. On a foggy October day, two battles decide the fate of a kingdom, and Europe awakens to yet another shift in the balance of power. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. The long pursuit and the quiet collapse of Prussia. After the double shock of Jena and Auerstädt, there is no pause to catch one's breath. The Prussian army does not have the luxury of reflection, and the French army does not offer it. What follows is not a single dramatic event, but a steady, exhausting movement eastward. A pursuit that feels less like a chase and more like gravity. Once set in motion, it simply keeps going, gently but relentlessly, pulling everything in one direction. Napoleon understands that this is the moment to press without hesitation. Battles break armies, but pursuits break states. The Prussian forces are scattered, confused, and uncertain who is in command or where safety lies. If given time, they might regroup, restore discipline, and form a new defensive line. So time is denied to them. French corps fan out across the countryside, advancing on parallel routes, each one pushing forward with calm determination, closing gaps before they can turn into opportunities. This system of pursuit is not chaotic. It is organized, almost methodical. Each corps is given a direction, a rhythm, and a purpose. Roads that once carried Prussian columns westward now carry French columns eastward. Villages wake to the sound of marching boots, then fall quiet again as the troops pass through. There is little resistance, only fragments of it, small rear guards that delay for a moment and then dissolve. Prussian units retreat in all directions at once, some toward fortresses, some toward rivers, others simply away from the French. Orders conflict, rumors spread, and confidence evaporates. Many soldiers do not know where their commanders are, and some commanders do not know where their soldiers have gone. In this fog of uncertainty, the French advance feels overwhelming, even when numbers are modest. Presence alone becomes pressure. Napoleon's marshals understand the goal clearly. They are not required to fight every enemy they see. Instead, they block roads, seize crossings, and position themselves between Prussian forces and safety. A garrison that finds its escape route cut often chooses surrender over isolation. A column that expects support and finds none often chooses the same. The French army becomes less an opponent and more a surrounding environment, everywhere and nowhere at once. Within days, the effects are dramatic. Entire Prussian formations lay down their arms without firing a shot. Fortresses surrender after brief negotiations, their commanders realizing that relief will never come. Supplies run out quickly when coordination disappears, and hunger is a persuasive argument. French officers accept capitulations with professional calm, recording numbers, securing weapons, and moving on. Berlin soon lies directly in the path of the advance. The Prussian capital, once confident in its military reputation, now feels exposed and strangely quiet. There is no great battle for the city. French troops enter with order and discipline, taking control with minimal resistance. The fall of Berlin is a psychological blow as much as a strategic one. A kingdom built on military pride sees its capital occupied, almost without a fight. Napoleon enters Berlin shortly afterward. For him, it is another step forward rather than a destination. Administration is organized, proclamations issued, and the pursuit continues. He has no intention of stopping simply because the capital has fallen. The Prussian army still exists in fragments, and fragments can still cut if ignored. Across northern Germany, surrenders multiply. At Prenzlau, a large Prussian force gives up under the impression that it is surrounded by overwhelming numbers. At other towns, garrisons capitulate upon hearing exaggerated reports of French strength. Fear travels faster than facts, and Napoleon benefits from the momentum. Each surrender encourages the next, creating a quiet cascade of collapse. Some Prussian commanders attempt to rally resistance, but coordination is gone. Messages take too long to arrive, and when they do, they often contradict one another. The chain of command stretches thin and then breaks entirely. Units act on local judgment, which in times like these often favors survival over defiance. Courage remains, but direction does not. Marshal Davout, his reputation enhanced by Auerstädt, plays a key role in the pursuit. His corps advances steadily, maintaining pressure and cutting off escape routes. Other marshals do the same, each contributing to a sense that there is no single front, no safe rear. Wherever Prussian forces turn, they find French troops already there, or arriving soon. One of the last significant concentrations of Prussian troops retreats toward the Baltic coast, hoping for evacuation or support. But the French move faster. At Lübeck, heavy fighting breaks out as Prussian soldiers and their allies attempt to hold the city. The struggle is intense and chaotic, but brief. French troops push through, and soon thousands more Prussians surrender. The idea of organized resistance grows increasingly distant. By now, the scale of the disaster is undeniable. In a matter of weeks, Prussia has lost tens of thousands of soldiers captured, vast quantities of artillery, and the coherence of its military system. What had taken decades to build has unraveled with astonishing speed. Observers across Europe struggle to understand how such a respected army could collapse so completely. The answer lies not in a lack of bravery, but in a mismatch of systems. Prussia's army was designed for a slower age, one where wars unfolded deliberately and battles were carefully arranged. Napoleon's army operates at a different tempo entirely. Speed replaces formality, initiative replaces rigid hierarchy, and decisions are made closer to the moment they are needed. Against this, tradition alone cannot hold. As winter approaches, the remnants of the Prussian state retreat eastward toward lands where Russian forces are expected to arrive. Hope shifts to alliance once again. If Prussia can hold on long enough, perhaps Russia will provide the strength needed to continue the fight. It is a thin hope, but hope nonetheless. Napoleon allows the Prussian king to withdraw, knowing that the real contest is not finished. Russia still has armies in the field, and the war is about to change character once more. For now, however, Prussia, as an independent military power, has effectively ceased to function. Its collapse has been swift, quiet, and strangely orderly, like a building emptied rather than destroyed. As French troops settle briefly into winter quarters, the mood is calm but alert. Victories have come easily, perhaps too easily, and experienced soldiers know that ease rarely lasts. The roads grow quieter, the pace slows, and attention turns eastward. Beyond the horizon, another army waits, larger, more cautious, and less inclined to panic. For the moment, Europe rests uneasily. One kingdom has fallen in weeks, another has risen higher than ever, and the snow begins to gather softly on fields that have seen too much marching. The pursuit has done its work, and the war moves on, unhurried, inevitable, and not yet finished. The Polish winter, Bennigsen, Eylau, and the long pause between storms. As the year turns and the armies drift eastward into Poland, the war slows in a way that feels heavy rather than peaceful. The roads narrow, the villages grow poorer, and the land itself seems reluctant to cooperate. Winter arrives not as a single event, but as a steady presence, damp, cold, and persistent. For the soldiers on both sides, this phase of the campaign is not defined by brilliant maneuvers or swift victories, but by endurance, patience, and the quiet test of simply continuing. Napoleon enters Poland at the end of 1806, following the shattered remnants of Prussia and turning his attention fully toward Russia. The French army is still large and confident, but it is no longer fresh. Months of marching, fighting, and pursuit have taken their toll. Shoes are worn thin, horses are exhausted, and supplies are increasingly difficult to secure. Poland offers little relief. The countryside is poor, the roads often little more than mud tracks, and winter weather turns every movement into effort. Opposing Napoleon is the Russian army under General Levin August Bennigsen. Bennigsen is cautious, methodical, and determined not to repeat the mistakes that destroyed Austria and Prussia. He understands that survival is itself a form of success. Rather than offering a clear target, he maneuvers carefully, retreating when necessary, and advancing only when conditions appear favorable. His goal is not to win quickly, but to wear the French down, using distance, weather, and time as allies. Early movements in Poland are confused and exhausting. Both armies attempt to outmaneuver one another, but winter intervenes repeatedly. Roads dissolve into mud during brief thaws, then freeze into rutted traps overnight. Supply wagons fall behind, horses collapse, and men march with bowed heads against wind and snow. Commanders plan operations that look reasonable on maps, only to watch them unravel in the field. Napoleon attempts to trap Bennigsen near the town of Putsk, but poor weather and slower than expected movement allow the Russians to slip away. Frustration sets in. The French army, accustomed to decisive outcomes, finds itself chasing shadows. Skirmishes flare up, then fade. No side gains a clear advantage, and both suffer quietly from hunger, cold, and fatigue. By late winter, Napoleon orders his army into temporary quarters. It is a necessary pause, though not a comfortable one. Soldiers spread out across villages trying to find shelter and food. Discipline frays at the edges, desertion increases, and morale dips. The illusion of effortless conquest has long vanished. War now feels slow, grinding, and deeply personal, measured in frostbitten fingers and empty stomachs. Bennigsen sees an opportunity in this pause. Believing the French dispersed and vulnerable, he launches a sudden winter offensive, hoping to catch isolated corps and inflict damage before Napoleon can react. Russian columns move forward through snow and ice, colliding unexpectedly with French patrols. For a moment, it seems the initiative may have shifted. Napoleon responds with speed even in these conditions. Orders are sent and French corps begin moving again, converging toward the threat. The movements are slower than in earlier campaigns, but still faster than Bennigsen expects. The Russians realize that they are in danger of being trapped themselves and begin withdrawing once more, fighting a series of sharp rearguard actions to cover their retreat. This cat-and-mouse movement continues until early February 1807, when both armies stumble into one another near the small town of Eylau. Neither side has chosen the ground carefully. It is simply where exhaustion, weather, and timing bring them together. Snow covers the fields, muffling sound and obscuring distance. Visibility is poor, and the cold is intense. The Battle of Eylau begins almost by accident with skirmishing that escalates into full engagement. Neither army has a clear positional advantage. The terrain is flat and exposed, offering little cover. Artillery fires blindly into the snow, guided more by sound than sight. Infantry advance and retreat through white haze, struggling to maintain formation. Napoleon commits his forces, seeking once again to break the enemy through concentration. Bennigsen responds with determination, refusing to yield ground easily. The fighting becomes brutal and close. Casualties mount rapidly as men fall not only to bullets and shells, but to exhaustion and exposure. Units lose direction, officers lose control, and the battlefield dissolves into isolated struggles. One of the most dramatic moments comes when a French corps advances into a snowstorm and loses its bearings, emerging directly in front of Russian guns. The result is devastating. Entire units are cut down in minutes and panic ripples through the line. For the first time in his reign as emperor, Napoleon faces a moment where defeat seems possible. To stabilize the situation, Napoleon orders a massive cavalry charge, one of the largest of the war. Thousands of horsemen surge forward across the snow, cutting into the Russian lines and buying time. The charge is spectacular and costly. It halts the Russian advance, but it does not decide the battle. When the snow settles and the firing slows, both sides remain standing, battered and uncertain. As night falls, the field of Eylau is a scene of quiet horror. Thousands of dead and wounded lie where they fell, half buried in snow. There is no clear victor. Both armies have suffered enormous losses, and neither has achieved a decisive result. The battle resumes the next day in a limited fashion, but momentum is gone. Bennigsen withdraws under cover of darkness, leaving Napoleon in possession of the field, but not of a true victory. Eylau is unlike Napoleon's earlier battles. There is no sweeping maneuver, no elegant resolution. It is a grinding, inconclusive struggle that leaves both sides exhausted. Napoleon claims success, but privately understands the cost. His army has been shaken, and the myth of effortless superiority has been challenged. Bennigsen, though retreating, has proven that the French can be held. In the weeks that follow, both armies pull back to recover. Reinforcements arrive, supplies are reorganized, and commanders reassess. The war enters a pause, not because it is finished, but because neither side can continue at the same intensity. Men need rest, horses need fodder, and plans need revision. For Napoleon, Eylau is a warning. Speed and boldness alone are not enough against an enemy willing to endure and retreat carefully. For Bennigsen, the battle is a validation of caution. Survival has meaning, and time can balance disadvantages. Yet both know that the war cannot remain suspended forever. As winter loosens its grip and the days begin to lengthen, preparations resume quietly. The armies repair themselves, replacing losses and restoring order. The land begins to thaw, turning snow into mud, then slowly into workable ground. Another confrontation is coming, and both sides understand that the next battle must bring resolution. In the stillness after Eylau, there is a strange calm. Fires burn low in camps, maps are spread on tables, and conversations are subdued. The soldiers sleep when they can, their dreams filled not with victory or defeat, but with warmth, rest, and the hope that the hardest part might already be behind them. The war, however, is patient. It waits, untroubled by exhaustion, ready to continue when spring finally arrives. Friedland, the river's edge, and the quiet handshake at Tilsit. When spring finally settles over Eastern Europe, it does not bring relief so much as permission. The snow withdraws, the roads soften, and armies that have been waiting impatiently begin to move again. After the frozen stalemate of winter, both sides understand that this next phase must bring clarity. Supplies are restored, reinforcements arrive, and worn formations regain shape. The war, slowed by cold and exhaustion, quietly resumes its steady pace. General Bennigsen leads the Russian army with caution sharpened by experience. Eylau has shown that the French can be resisted and that survival is not the same as defeat. Yet it has also shown how costly indecision can be. Bennigsen seeks an opportunity to strike a portion of Napoleon's forces before they can fully concentrate, hoping to inflict a blow strong enough to force negotiation on more equal terms. It is a reasonable aim, but it depends on timing that leaves little margin for error. That opportunity seems to appear near the small town of Friedland, close to the Eylau River. Bennigsen believes he has found an isolated French corps under Marshal Lannes. The terrain appears favorable at first glance. If the Russians can overwhelm this force quickly, they might gain the advantage they have been seeking for months. Bennigsen orders his army forward, committing large numbers of troops across the river to engage. Marshal Lannes understands the danger immediately. His corps is indeed outnumbered, facing a much larger Russian force. Retreat would be risky, but standing still would be disastrous. Instead, Lannes does what experienced commanders do best. He delays. He deploys his men carefully, using skirmishers, terrain, and controlled withdrawals to slow the Russian advance. Every minute gained is precious because time is exactly what Napoleon needs. Messages are sent, and Napoleon responds without hesitation. Orders ripple outward, calling nearby corps to converge on Friedland with speed and urgency. The familiar rhythm returns. Columns march, bridges are crossed, and the French army begins to assemble once more. Bennigsen, meanwhile, continues feeding troops across the river, convinced that he can finish the battle before French reinforcements arrive. By the morning of June 14th, the situation has shifted. What Bennigsen believed would be a quick engagement has turned into a growing confrontation. The Russian army finds itself compressed against the river, its movements constrained by water at its back and limited crossing points. The ground narrows, and flexibility disappears. Napoleon arrives on the field and surveys the scene with calm attention. The enemy's position, once promising, now appears dangerously fixed. Napoleon recognizes the opportunity instantly. An army pressed against a river has little room to retreat and less room to adapt. He orders his forces into position with deliberate care, ensuring that each corps understands its role. Artillery is brought forward, massed, and aligned to dominate the battlefield. Infantry prepares to advance in coordination, and cavalry stands ready to exploit any break. The battle unfolds steadily rather than explosively. French artillery opens fire, concentrating on Russian formations packed tightly near the riverbanks. The effect is devastating. Cannon fire tears through dense ranks, and the limited space makes dispersal impossible. Russian units attempt to respond, but movement is slow and confused. Orders must travel through crowded formations, and control slips away. As the bombardment continues, French infantry advances methodically, supported closely by guns. The pressure increases with each step. Russian counterattacks are launched, brave but disorganized, unable to gain momentum. Napoleon commits additional corps at the right moment, reinforcing success rather than rescuing failure. The battle becomes a demonstration of concentration, where force is applied exactly where resistance is weakest. One critical sector sees French troops push toward Friedland itself. Fires break out as artillery shells strike buildings, and smoke mingles with dust and heat. Russian soldiers fight stubbornly, but the situation grows desperate. Retreat routes are threatened, bridges become clogged, and panic begins to spread. Units that might have withdrawn in good order find themselves trapped by congestion and confusion. By late afternoon, the Russian position collapses. Bennigsen orders a retreat, but the order comes too late. Thousands of soldiers attempt to cross the river under fire. Some manage to escape, others are killed, wounded, or captured. Equipment is abandoned, formations dissolve, and the battle ends in clear French victory. The cost is heavy on both sides, but the outcome is unmistakable. Friedland is decisive in a way Eylau was not. The Russian army has been beaten soundly, its confidence shaken, its losses severe. Bennigsen withdraws eastward, no longer seeking battle but safety. Prussia, already shattered, loses its last hope of immediate support. The strategic balance shifts sharply in Napoleon's favor, and the path to negotiation opens at last. Napoleon does not pursue recklessly. He understands that victory now offers something more valuable than further destruction. The Russian Emperor Alexander, advised by his counselors and confronted with the state of his army, agrees to seek peace. Messages are exchanged, and arrangements are made for a meeting that is as symbolic as it is practical. The two emperors meet near the town of Tilsit on a raft anchored in the middle of the Niemen River. The setting is carefully chosen, neutral ground, surrounded by water, neither land nor sea. The meeting is calm, even cordial. Alexander and Napoleon speak at length, discovering a surprising ease in one another's company. Compliments are exchanged, stories shared, and a sense of mutual respect begins to form. Behind the politeness lies calculation. Napoleon has achieved military dominance and now seeks diplomatic confirmation. Alexander, facing limited options, seeks favorable terms and time to recover. Prussia, represented but marginalized, has little influence over the outcome. The discussions extend over days, accompanied by ceremonies, banquets, and displays of goodwill. The treaties of Tilsit formalize a new arrangement in Europe. Russia agrees to withdraw from the war and align itself, at least temporarily, with French interests. Prussia suffers severe territorial losses, reduced in size and status. New political entities are created, and French influence is extended further east. The map of Europe is adjusted once again, lines drawn and redrawn with confident strokes. For Napoleon, Tilsit represents the peak of his power. He has defeated the major continental armies, dictated terms to former enemies, and reshaped the political landscape according to his vision. For Alexander, the agreement offers breathing room and the hope of stability. For Europe, it brings a pause, though not peace, in any lasting sense. As the armies withdraw and diplomats depart, the battlefield quiets. Soldiers rest, repair equipment, and reflect on campaigns that have carried them across half a continent. The war, for now, has reached a natural stopping point. Yet beneath the calm, tensions remain. Alliances formed under pressure rarely endure unchanged. In the gentle aftermath of Friedland and Tilsit, Europe settles into a fragile balance. Napoleon stands at the height of his influence, confident and composed. His enemies regroup quietly, watching and waiting. The river flows on, indifferent to treaties and triumphs, while the next chapter of the story gathers itself, patient and inevitable, just beyond the horizon. The peninsula burns, the Danube resists, and the weight of victory. After Tilsit, Europe exhales, but it is not a deep breath, only a shallow pause. Treaties have been signed, armies have withdrawn, and Napoleon stands at what appears to be the summit of his power. Yet beneath the surface, the empire is already stretching itself thin. The map may look orderly, but maintaining that order requires constant attention, constant movement, and constant force. Peace, such as it is, proves fragile and brief. The first cracks appear far to the southwest, on the Iberian Peninsula. Napoleon's system of continental control depends on economic pressure as much as military strength. To enforce it, he intervenes more deeply in Spain and Portugal, expecting compliance and stability. Instead, he finds resistance not in the form of neat armies on open fields, but in widespread unrest, ambushes, and a war that refuses to behave properly. French troops occupy cities and win battles, yet control slips away between them. dissolving into countryside and mountains. What begins as a strategic adjustment becomes a grinding commitment. More troops are sent south, then more still. Experienced commanders are tied down, divisions that might have reinforced the main army are scattered across Spain and Portugal. The war there moves slowly, absorbing men, time, and attention. Napoleon underestimates the cost at first, believing that pressure and organization will eventually restore order. Instead, the peninsula becomes a drain that never quite empties. Across Europe, Austria watches carefully. Defeated at Austerlitz, humbled by treaties and forced into concessions, it has spent years reforming its army. Lessons have been learned, structures adjusted, and confidence slowly rebuilt. By 1809, Austrian leaders sense an opportunity. Napoleon is distracted, his forces divided, his attention stretched between multiple fronts. With encouragement from Britain and faith in their preparations, Austria decides to challenge France once more. The declaration of war comes sooner than Napoleon expects. Austrian forces move quickly, striking into Bavaria, a French ally, before French troops can fully concentrate. For a brief moment, it appears that surprise has succeeded. French units are scattered and command is uncertain. Napoleon reacts with urgency, leaving Spain and racing north. Within days, he resumes personal command, restoring coherence through speed and decisive orders. What follows is a rapid and complex campaign. Napoleon moves his corps with familiar agility, striking isolated Austrian forces, exploiting gaps, and correcting earlier misalignments. Engagements come in quick succession, each one sharp and purposeful. The French army is no longer the finely tuned instrument of earlier years, filled increasingly with young conscripts and allied contingents, but it remains effective under Napoleon's direction. Austria retreats methodically, avoiding destruction while yielding ground. Vienna falls once again, but the Austrian army does not collapse. Instead, it withdraws across the Danube, choosing its ground carefully. There, on the northern bank of the great river, Archduke Charles prepares to make a stand. The Danube itself becomes a weapon, wide, fast, and difficult to cross, under fire. Napoleon decides to force the issue. He orders bridges constructed and troops sent across to the northern bank near the villages of Aspern and Essling. At first, the crossing succeeds and French units establish a foothold. Napoleon expects the Austrians to retreat, as they have before. This time they do not. Charles launches a full-scale counterattack, committing his army against the exposed French bridgehead. The Battle of Aspern-Essling unfolds over 2 days of intense and confused fighting. Villages change hands repeatedly, streets become battlegrounds, and casualties rise quickly. Austrian artillery pounds French positions, while the river disrupts French supply and reinforcement. Each time the bridges are damaged or destroyed, French units are cut off from support, forced to fight with what they have. Napoleon attempts to stabilize the situation, committing reserves and launching counterattacks. Yet the flow of reinforcements remains uncertain and ammunition runs short. The Austrians fight with renewed confidence, their reforms evident in discipline and coordination. For the first time in years, Napoleon finds himself unable to impose his will on the battlefield. As pressure mounts, Napoleon orders a withdrawal back to the island of Lobau. The retreat is conducted with care, preventing disaster, but the result is unmistakable. Aspern-Essling is a defeat, the first major one Napoleon has suffered in open battle. The cost is high, not only in casualties but in morale. one of Napoleon's closest and most capable commanders, is mortally wounded, a loss that weighs heavily. The pause that follows is tense and purposeful. Napoleon does not accept defeat as final. He gathers reinforcements, reorganizes his army, and studies the ground. Engineers strengthen bridges, supply systems are improved, and artillery is concentrated in unprecedented numbers. The response is thorough and methodical. Where Aspern-Essling exposed weakness, preparation now aims to eliminate it. In early July, Napoleon crosses the Danube again, this time with overwhelming force. The crossing is secure, the bridge is solid, and the army moves forward deliberately. Archduke Charles takes position near the village of Wagram, deploying his army along a broad front. The battlefield is vast, the largest yet seen in Europe, and the outcome will depend on endurance as much as brilliance. The Battle of Wagram lasts 2 long days. Fighting spreads across miles of open ground, villages, and shallow streams. Austrian attacks strike hard, threatening French flanks and forcing Napoleon to react. The French army bends, but does not break. Gradually, Napoleon brings his greatest strength to bear: concentrated artillery. Massed batteries open fire, hammering Austrian positions relentlessly. The ground shakes, formations thin, and resistance weakens under the constant pressure. Infantry advances follow, coordinated and sustained, while cavalry stands ready to exploit openings. The battle becomes a test of resilience, each side absorbing punishment and pushing forward where it can. By the second day, the Austrian army begins to withdraw. The retreat is organized and disciplined, not a rout, but the field belongs to the French. Wagram is a victory, but it is not the clean, decisive triumphs of earlier years. Casualties are enormous on both sides, and the French army is visibly strained. Napoleon has won, yet the cost is unmistakable. Austria soon seeks an armistice. Another treaty follows, another reshaping of territory and influence. On paper, Napoleon remains dominant. In reality, something has shifted. Victories now require greater effort, greater sacrifice, and greater reliance on firepower rather than maneuver. The empire holds, but it is heavier, slower, and more vulnerable than before. As the campaign ends, Europe enters another uneasy calm. The peninsula still burns in the south, consuming resources and attention. Austria is subdued, but not broken. Russia watches carefully from the east. Napoleon remains powerful, but the limits of power are becoming visible. In the quiet after Wagram, soldiers rest where they can, among fields scarred by cannon fire and villages marked by loss. The war has not ended, only changed its tone. The victories are still real, but they feel different now. Harder won, more costly, less forgiving. And as the empire settles into this fragile balance, one truth becomes clear. Napoleon has reached the height of his influence, but not the end of his journey. Beyond the calm, beyond the treaties and reorganizations, the future waits patiently, shaped not by a single battle or decision, but by the accumulating weight of all that has come before.